My name is Steve Coltrane. I'm the founder and chairman of Coltrane and Associates. We're probably best known for cleaning up the Olympic mess in Salt Lake City years ago, and that led to Mitt Romney and our association with him, and it goes on to a whole lot of things that I won't bore you to death with. But that's a little bit of background of where we come from. We've been in business here in New York City for about 35 years. Don't comment on my age, please. We're delighted to have you here in our New York City offices, and we're going to have both a lot of fun, and I think we're going to do something today very important. We're going to launch a new company. I'm going to spend a minute introducing what we would call our guest of honor in normal circumstances. She is the Chief Executive Officer and Chairwoman of a new company called Palindromes. Let me tell you a little bit about her. She grew up on a farm in rural America in Unionville, Missouri. She attended the University of Missouri, where she got a degree in agribusiness of some kind. She got a law degree from the University of Missouri. She did some general litigation in the state of Missouri and then worked in politics for Senator Bond, who was at the time the agricultural senator, really. She was in charge of all things agriculture. She then became president of Gills Law and Gills Management Group and lived for a while in China, in Beijing and Shanghai, working for with the EB5 program, which I think most of you are familiar with. For those of you who aren't, she met with high-level investors in international finance and worked with them to invest in the United States, where they got, in return for a substantial investment, a visa for them and their families. So now her name is Karla Klingner, and that's the formal introduction. Now I'm going to tell you what I know about her. Informally. Karla is a unique individual. I first met her almost 8 years ago, and that's too long a story to tell here, but it is a story that we ought to think about sometime, because along the way we've had a lot of fun together and gotten to know Karla pretty well. Karla's unusual in that she is a small town girl in a way still, with a very international and big vision. She is, in fact, in my view, an entrepreneurial genius. We say around here that we, in the public relations business, create the future. Nowhere will that be more meaningful than in the work we do in the future with Palindromes and with Karla. Karla, like most geniuses, has a vision so big that it takes you a while to get your arms around it. Not sure what that's about, but we'll continue. It took me a long time to figure out and understand what it was she actually wanted to do. And then when I finally understood what she wanted to do, I was with some of my staff, and I said, when I got it and the light came on, I said, she's a genius. And she is a genius, but she's an entrepreneurial genius, and she makes things happen through relationships. And she has a big heart and a big, bold, achievable vision. That's what we're going to do together, and that's what we're announcing today. So Karla, there's not much else I can say about you, except that it's a pleasure to work with you. I'm glad this finally has happened and come to fruition, and I think we're going to do great things together. Just so you know, Karla's been interviewed by 4 journalists. One has written about her, three others are going to. When we put out this press release this afternoon, that'll go up incrementally by a significant number. And our goal is to take the Karla that we know and turn her into a recognizable figure anywhere on the planet. That'll help her realize all the things she needs to do to achieve this vision. So now I give you the chairwoman and CEO of Palindromes, Karla Klingner. Yeah, do the board first. Yeah.
Well,
Then I'm going to sit down.
wow, thank you, Steve. That was an introduction I wasn't quite prepared for. So you set the bar high right out the door. So I would like to actually start out by introducing our board, some of our board members that are here today. We also have kind of a search going on to do some additional industry and consumer board members that have been identified but not finalized at this stage. So with us today, we actually have our general counsel, Ralph Ross, who resides in Dallas, Texas. I started working with Ralph a similar time frame as Steve, about 7-8 years ago, on an effort to do something in the building products and construction materials space that's been a long journey and part of the launch today. And so Ralph, do you mind coming up and just talking for a few moments about your background and where you're located and your role on the board?
Sure. Thank you, Karla, and I appreciate everybody being here today for this grand announcement. It's been a long time, I think, finally getting here, but I think great things are ahead for all of us. I started out, I'm one of the few, I'm going to say, born and raised Dallasites of Dallas, Texas. It seems like most of the people that I run into in Dallas have come from here. And so I'm one of the few that have stayed there. I started out graduating from the University of Texas in Austin, got my law degree in Lubbock, Texas at Texas Tech, and have practiced in Dallas my whole life. I started out doing title defense litigation, did a lot of oil and gas work for various companies, including my family, and then went on into litigation, representing various companies, did corporate work representing probably half a dozen different companies, anywhere varying from $5 to $35 million companies, taking them from startup stages through actual operations. And in 2 cases, the companies have actually, I'm now getting to show my age, they've actually retired, and the senior partners I was working with have since sold out. With Karla's company here, it was very exciting when we first met with her, and the people that I met with. We were interested in trying to do something to green up the industry as far as building products were concerned. We saw very early on that there was a real problem with the rather toxic chemicals that were being used in and the fire retardant materials that were being used to try to gain and increase insulative power at the expense of fire safety. We have incidences now, the Dubai fires that have occurred, the Monte Carlo casino that burned, most recently the Greenfell Towers. If you followed the news, you'll notice that a lot of the people that really were able to survive that fire were suddenly found to be suffering from having various poisonings from the noxious gases that were put off by these types of insulated powers. So I sought through the companies and with the help of people like Dr. Anderson, who Karla will introduce here shortly, to come up with a better and a greener product. I think we've been able to do that, and we're looking forward in working with Karla to making that product become available and usable throughout the entire world, certainly here in the United States, but also throughout Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph, for that. We have another board member here who is a local, not originally from New York, but calls New York home now. Originally hails from New Mexico and kind of has a very appropriate upbringing for what we're getting ready to do in the agricultural and meat space. And that is going to be our Chief Investment Officer, Brian Rodgers. So Brian, if you would mind saying a few words about yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Karla. Appreciate it. So yeah, she said my name's Brian Rodgers. I grew up in New Mexico on a farm. My family had been farmers for about 4 generations. I left and enlisted in the Marine Corps, as some kids do when they get out of high school, and I did that for a while and eventually graduated with a degree in finance from Cal State Long Beach on the West Coast. Became a bond trader, got onto Wall Street, became a bond trader at a firm called PIMCO out in Orange County. Did that for a while, came here to New York and got my MBA down the street at NYU Stern. Went to work at Deutsche Bank. When I graduated with my MBA, I sold credit default swaps on mortgages and CDOs and all those lovely products that blew up in 2008. And so during this period, I shifted my career a bit and went into the equity market, and I helped Brazilian companies raise money for IPOs and things for about 3 or 4 years with some various Brazilian banks, including the Safra family and some others. I met Karla when I was working for a financial services firm that was doing a lot of marketing and events. And immediately I could tell that she was a pretty unique character. And not only was she an interesting person to work with, given how intelligent she was, I was amazed at how similar our backgrounds were, from sort of small-time farm people who had kind of worked their way up and then ended up here on the East Coast in this world, but had never really lost that connection to that small-town community and the way those people's lives still work. And the more I understood what her vision and what her passion was for what she was doing here, I immediately knew that this was something I wanted to be a part of. And so I think we're just barely starting out on this journey. And as Mr. Ross said, I'm very excited. I think there's big things for all of us. But I think the important thing here is that more than the benefits that are going to accrue to the people in this room are the benefits that can really accrue globally to everyone. Because I think her vision and the way she's moving things forward is absolutely what we need in the world right now on a number of different levels. And I think you'll obviously hear a lot more about that going forward, but I think it's a very exciting time for all of us. Thank you.
Just a little backdrop. When I first met Ralph, he was on the other side of a negotiating table, and I did not realize I was negotiating. I ended up making some concessions, and I had to call him up and said, "Wow, I didn't even know we were negotiating," and I hung up that phone and realized you got me to make some concessions that I wasn't prepared to make today. So there's going to be a day and a moment in time where you're going to be on my side of the table. And with Brian, we met and we had a lot of commonality, and I was actually getting on the train to leave New York to come to DC, and he called and said, "I think I might want to be a part of this," and I thought it was a very happy surprise because I definitely saw a lot of opportunity and similar vision, and that's a lot about how this has been coming together is meeting like-minded folks with a similar vision who can help achieve, as Steve said, something quite grand. Next, I would like to actually, Steve, do you want to take any more words on the microphone, or Steve Coltrane has been gracious enough to agree after all these years to also come on to the board. And I think he's already done the introduction. Would you like to add anything more to that?
I think I've said enough.
Okay. I have 3 other very special folks here in the room, but I think I'm going to scare Steve and go off script just a moment, if you don't mind. And before I introduce them, I think I may talk a little bit about my background, and then let each of them be introduced and talk a little bit about their background, because it's so significant to some of the initial projects we're getting ready to announce. Are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I know Susan's looking at me like, you don't ever do this to your PR team.
Just remember that we have people on the phone.
Yes. Yeah, we'll do that.
Okay.
So just a little bit about my background and kind of how the vision and palindromes have come to be. As Steve said, I grew up in a small rural community on the Missouri-Iowa border. We actually farmed in both states, in Missouri and Iowa, called Unionville, Missouri. My dad was a beef cattle farmer, pigs when I was quite small, but obviously when you meet one of our board members, that industry's changed a lot in my lifetime. Soybean and corn and some wheat. And my dad's specialty was he was a high-end geneticist, so he was kind of very on the cutting edge of genetics and artificial insemination and what that would look like in terms of natural selection and crossbreeding. And he sold cattle and show cattle to kids who were in 4-H and FFA and showed all over the country. And so during the 80s farm crisis, in the community where I lived, we had a lot of hog producers at the time, and there was a lot of consolidation going on in the agricultural industry. And I remember being in junior high and sitting at a lunch table with a couple of my very close girlfriends. We weren't talking about, clothes or hair or those sorts of things. We were actually talking about markets and what was happening in the community, what that meant for the future of agriculture and what it meant specifically for their families, because their families were having to exit out of the livestock production industry because they could not handle the swings that the markets were having at the time. And so it was kind of, I guess I would say, in that moment in time, I was probably in about 7th grade, that I knew that the pendulum was going one very strong direction in terms of consolidation and big agricultural industry. It was like I could feel kind of that change happening and what that meant for rural communities. Since that time, the rural community where I am from has struggled to keep its hospital doors open, has struggled with a tax base in its schools, has struggled to attract and bring young people back into the community, although I have 3 siblings who all moved back to the community and help work on the family farming operation even to this day. They also have to have some outside jobs and some other things to sustain that. But my dad was a bit isolated from that crisis because he was in a specialty, what I would call a specialty niche or premium market. So he was able to control his prices. His prices weren't really set by market standards. He had very direct relations with end consumers and end buyers that were from Maryland to California to Texas. In my adult life, I remember going to a farmer's market in Washington, D.C., and going to buy some beef from a family farm in Maryland, and we found out that their genetic line and their cattle herd actually was originally purchased from our farm. And so I remember thinking, what a moment to be buying really a parentage line from my home farm in a farmer's market in Washington, D.C. And so it's really understanding that direct connection with the consumer and being able to look at pricing different than the way that the markets are typically handled. And that's how our family survived the 80s farm crisis and was able to keep the farm intact. And I think that lesson stayed with me through the years as the consolidation continued. Kind of the agricultural industry became, much more controlled in the hands of a few large companies. I did go on to, as Steve indicated, get my agricultural business degree and law degree, which eventually took me into Washington, D.C. from the policy side, where during the 2007 Farm Bill and the 2007 Water Resource Development Act, I was very instrumental in kind of working on that legislative language and policy language for a senior member on both the Agricultural, Water Resource Development, Environment Public Works Committee and Appropriations Committee. And so I definitely had a lot of exposure on maybe what was happening in the industry on both sides, and really saw the importance of being able to balance where we were and to be able to feed the world, and meet those metrics in terms of needs globally, as well as not losing that community-based focus on independent agricultural and making sure that farmers still had the ability to have some choice and some freedoms in the way that they produce. And during that time, I mean, it was the world is flat, globalization really started taking off, and what that meant in terms of markets and market changes. So when I exited the Hill, I went to a law firm in DC that specialized in commodities work and agricultural law, including the commodities trade and the Chicago Merc and a lot of the associations for the checkoffs. And so I was able to kind of develop some additional skills from that experience. And ultimately, the conclusion that I made about 10 years ago was that I felt that there was a better way to enhance local communities and production, to allow farmers to have more dollars flowing into their pocket as part of that food value chain. Right now, a producer, maybe earns about 5% of that dollar, but is carrying about 55% of that industry risk. That's a very significant thing. Definitely it is a backbone, I felt, of our society, and that was something that we needed to be able to continue to preserve and enhance. And how do you do that in a way that allows them to compete in what was becoming a very global world? Now, this was before, and I can even see in the audiences, before everybody had phones in their pockets. I mean, BlackBerries were kind of a thing then, and people were responding to some messages from BlackBerries, but I mean, people didn't live on their phones. Amazon wasn't a word that we had in our vocabulary. Alibaba wasn't something that we had in our vocabulary. So I went to my mentor at the firm, a gentleman by the name of Mike McLeod, who's recently retired, and I told Mike that I thought that there could be a better way to handle markets and more direct connection with markets and more direct connection with the consumers, and that if we did that in a way directly with the producers, we would have a better way to kind of enhance their income and minimize their risk and really get a product to market that consumers wanted. Well, that sounded pretty crazy back then. What did you say? So we got a little bit crazy back then because the technology wasn't in a place that was in line with the vision, okay? And since that time, I exited out and started, thought I had this idea that if I started working with folks on their immigration goals and their investment goals and helping facilitate a way to transfer funds transparently and legally around the world and move people and companies and help them grow and get through those immigration and financial hurdles, that it would really kind of lead into the opportunity to understand what was happening in these markets. And that's what I did. That took me into the EB5 space, which in its purest form was intended to enhance rural economic development and target and employment areas, which is how I met Ralph Ross, who you just heard on the board, because they were looking at doing a facility in rural Missouri and manufacturing. It ended up being not really after the 2008 crisis the way that the program has evolved. So how I evolved in the program is I started helping a lot of folks who had been maybe invested in some deals that had not worked out, some for good reasons, maybe for some not for the best of reasons, and facilitating still their way through that immigration process, helping both of the governments kind of work through the best way to handle the relations as it relates to that, and working on maybe policy modifications to help that program work better going forward. And I think that that the folks that are behind that program are committed to that and working through that even as I'm here today. And so during that time, we started pulling teams together to start working on market intelligence and understanding what the global markets were wanting in terms of a product and understanding what the farmers' needs were in terms of that product. And as a result, ultimately, is how Palindromes formed. We took that information. It was our understanding that, in fact, consumers were wanting a premium product, a more value-add product, a different way to look at how we handle inputs, how we look at efficiencies and movement of goods. And the number one cargo that moves around the world is air. And because of that, we knew that if we could improve efficiencies in the transportation, we could also improve the cash flows and the cost by moving out so many hands in the middle, having more direct relations with the end buyer. I think it's a concept people can understand in the consumer world because it's kind of like a farm to fork or farm to table concept that you see when you go to a restaurant, except in the commodity space and in a bigger scale. And through that is when I realized there was a lot of relevancy to just base needs in general, and to be able to truly help move and the ebbs and flows of goods. That my passion started from the agricultural side, that we had to focus on community-based strengths around the world, and looking at what those strengths were regionally, anywhere where we were in the world, and elevate that in a way that could compete in a global market. An example of that, today I have with me two gentlemen, and I'm going to put them on the spot. Benoit, who's sitting in the audience today, and Russ, who's sitting in the audience today. Benoit is from Cameroon, immigrated to the United States, has had a incredible career and an honorable career, but has never lost his passion and roots for his home country, and ended up inheriting a coffee farm from his father that is still in the family, and his sister is managing, and has been in discussions with us on how to better connect what they're doing in Cameroon in a coffee farm in a way that makes sense. I introduced him to Russ, who's trying to do the same thing, and not just trying, is doing the same thing in the pork industry. And that led to an exchange of what we need here in the coffee industry versus what they need there in the pork industry, and how you build out these interdependent closed-loop systems around the region. And that's really what we do. And whether it is in agriculture, whether it is in shelter and building products, energy, water, we have built a model that focuses on the most basic human needs, and finding a better way to have those needs readily accessible in a marketplace with a verifiable story. I guess you can understand that in the sense of technology that you hear now, like blockchain, for example. Again, when we were building this vision, those words weren't in the vocabulary, but it was more about building a system with verifiable inputs, verifiable stories in a way that enhances the community and the regions and connecting them better in global markets. And that's what our portfolio is set out to accomplish. And we believe that it is, yes, a grand vision, but a very achievable vision, and not only achievable, but we're already doing it. We created, the last step actually was to create the entity and to start to create the brand of that entity, and working with Coltrane and his team on how to better communicate a vision that was quite this bold. But we believe with the folks that we have assembled in the team, that it is achievable, and it is socially responsible, it is scalable, and it is economically viable, so that for shareholders, the dollar is one factor, and the dollar actually comes when you do things in the right reasons and for the right purpose. And that is ultimately how we have built the company. The essence of the logo with the triangle really is that not so much that the golden rule wins at this point. It has to do with an ebb and flow balance of the importance of dollars and investment, balanced out with the importance of innovators and visionaries, of which I am going to be introducing 3 of them here shortly, and those that have the ability to execute and bring that vision together. And that's the essence of what we have done, is looking at how we combine the dollars with the right innovator and the right ability to execute this on a global scale. And so from that, I would like to introduce 3 of our very important members of the board, and their roles and what that's going to be, and what their innovations are, and what that means in terms of our efforts going forward. I'd like to start with Dr. Anderson. Dr. Anderson is going to be instrumental in our Science and Innovation Advisory Board, working through new models on profit sharing for tech transfers, specifically in the building products and construction materials space. So at this point in time, I would like to turn the floor over to Dr. Anderson so he can talk about his background and the significance of his technologies.
Thank you, Karla. My name is Per Just Andersen, and let me first explain I was born in Copenhagen, Denmark, which I think explains my accent. So please bear with me. I have lived many years in the United States, and I'd like to say first that I got to know Karla through the work that I've been doing with Ralph Ross over the last 5 years in the company ECP. We were first involved through the EB5 visa program. And I will say this about Karla: the more I work with her, the more respect I get for her, the more appreciation I get for her knowledge. And if you're an entrepreneur, first of all, you have to have the drive to keep pushing and moving things forward. Karla has that. Okay. My background: I'm a material scientist, and that means I have a very polytechnical background. I got my first degree, a master's degree in chemical engineering from the Technical University of Copenhagen. My second master's I got from Penn State University. And at that point I really specialized in cement technology, but if you are a material scientist and you get that kind of education, it's a very broad education where you learn about all kinds of materials, whether that being plastic or inorganic, organic. You learn about that as a whole package. My last degree is in also material science, PhD from University of Copenhagen, the Technical University. Previously in my life, I have lived in California for about 22 years. I have worked with people in California where we've been doing startup companies. And as such, I've been doing 4 startup companies together with well-known people such as Isam Khashoggi and Gary Winnick. And as such, in the 90s, we had, for instance, a project where we developed biodegradable containers for McDonald's, something completely different than the building industry. But that led to, at that time, the biggest stock market introduction for $2.2 billion. Later on, McDonald's didn't really want the product, and they started while using a paper container. The material we developed was totally biodegradable. In 1 week in a composting bin, it would go away. It was a fantastic product, just didn't fly with the economics required by McDonald's. Since then, I have worked on many different projects associated with the building industry. And as such, I have worked on projects like the Great Belt Link connection in Denmark, the French-British Tunnel, and also I had the opportunity to, here in New York, work with the Port Authority and local ready-mix companies to work on projects like Freedom Tower and Beekman Tower, Times Square 11, just to mention a few. And as a matter of fact, I am the guy who optimized the concrete for all those 3 structures here in New York. We have a technology as part of ECP, which you will hear more about later, but one of the technologies is to optimize concrete. And it's, as a matter of fact, possible to optimize concrete beyond what industry is doing today, so that you can, as a matter of fact, get superior properties, but also save money. And the savings by doing what we were doing was for Freedom Tower around 5 million, Beekman Tower about 2 million. That's of course small numbers compared to the total construction cost, but that's what is in it if you can actually optimize that concrete to have improved properties. In ECP, that we'll talk more about in details, but we have basically some different products that we think will revolutionize the building industry. And one of them is an insulation material that is cement-based. The name ECP, Emerging Composite Products, means that we are looking at making new type of building products that are composite materials. That means there's some fiber involved, and we get unique properties by combining, in this case, cement with fiber that can give us these different strength properties that therefore leads to products that is totally new to the market. So as such, we know there's a big problem in the world with plastic insulation materials. It burns, it melts. One of our new materials is high temperature insulation that doesn't burn, made with cement as a binder. Second type of product is wall cladding, where we have a whole new production technology where we're extruding wall cladding boards. And thereby get some unique properties that will also be new to markets like today's dominated by E-Tex or by James Hardie. The technology used by both those two organizations is 100-year-old technology. We have basically this new technology that we think will take over the building market. The third type of product we have is fire-resistant doors, and what we're doing here is we're using gypsum as a way to give off water when the material heats up, and that creates a cooling effect and therefore fire resistance. We are the first company that basically is extruding gypsum. So we're extruding frames, stiles and rails, and thereby have a very unique technology to make fire-resistant doors. In my life, as you say, what I'm really good at is inventing things, okay? I just happen to come up with ideas for how to do things different and combine machinery and theoretical knowledge. And by combining those two things together, I have managed to come up with the ideas to make new products. So in my life, I can say that I have filed more than 105 US patents. If you want to know the international patents, you probably have to multiply that by 3 or 4 to get the total number. And in the last 5 years for the company ECP, we have filed more than 30 patents, 30 US patents, okay? So as a brief introduction, I think I'll stop right now and say thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. We like to say Dr. Anderson is a serial inventor, and he is. And when our tech transfer team internally looked him up, they just could not get over the number of patents that he had filed. Thank you. And so we are incredibly excited to have him be willing to participate with us on the science and innovation side, because as he said, it isn't just building materials. He's done concepts he's had in terms of biodegradable packaging on the stuff we'll be doing in the food space. Materials, I mean, we've been looking at a lot of sediment materials, how to better handle additives and more efficient ways to handle the mixtures in concrete. He's been very instrumental in working with us and advising us over the last year on quality grade of fly ash and cement and different materials that we may be importing or moving globally, and what that looks like generally in the space in both the United States and globally, as well as the fact that we believe that the time is now for regulatory movement and changes as it relates to the building products industry in light of the fire, as Mr. Ross mentioned in London last year. Most of the world outside of the United States follows the British building products, British standards of building, and so we intend on being very instrumental in those regulatory discussions that are going on in Europe, and what that looks like for the future of the building products industry and for the safety of its inhabitants. And so we're very excited to have Dr. Anderson's depth of knowledge and skill set on the team. Next, I would like to introduce Russell Kramer, who has been nice enough to come out today. He will be CEO and handling a new venture called Hope Ventures, which is I don't want to say a new concept by any stretch, but I would say a concept that the time is now and the time is right to implement in the food and feed space. And so he and I met about 13 years ago when I was working in Capitol Hill. I always say we're a very nonpartisan organization, politically speaking, because he came in as the president and representative to the Farmers Union. I was working for the Republican member at the time, and we worked very closely together in identifying priorities for the state and the nation that was in line with both sides. And I had tremendous respect for how he worked with us in our office to be able to find the middle ground and the common ground to reach a resolution in the Farm Bill that benefited all the parties at the table. And so I have great affection for that time when we worked together, and since then have crossed paths throughout the years for varying agricultural endeavors, and I'm excited to announce his involvement and agreement to serve on both the Palindromes board and to chair our farmer advisory board that we will be assembling over the next several months, and to talk a little bit about the vision for Hope Ventures. So.
Thank you, Karla. I'm honored and excited to be here for this very special event. What we're launching here today, is a missing link to, I believe that all societies have to have agrarian landscapes, and that's why I'm so honored to be the chair of the of this agricultural committee, because it's so important. It still is the premise of a sustainable economy that reinvests and thrives. It's something that we're going to be able to show as a model for the rest of the world. And so we're going to do it. It's so important. We're going to revitalize rural communities. We're going to reinvigorate entrepreneurism and innovation throughout the world. We're going to do the best we can to allow for food sovereignty in every country in this world, working together. So I'm very proud to be here, and congratulations, Karl.
Thank you. Yesterday, Russ and I had a conversation over coffee, and it happened to involve the fact that I said, part of this endeavor, we have to work on the public perception and image of a farmer here in the United States and globally. We have two of them in the room right now, and that they are soil scientists, they are geneticists, they are accountants, they have to understand ROIs, they have to make difficult decisions, they have to understand the weather. It's a very sophisticated operation to be able to maintain a farming operation anywhere in the world today. And what we're trying to do is bring teams together that understand that and can elevate that in the public eye. And we think that's really important. When I was in law school one time, I had a professor, it was a real estate class, and he was talking about the importance of recording a deed and what that meant. And I remember he said, even a farmer knows to record a deed. And I thought, wow, that was really offensive. Of course a farmer knows to record a deed. Who doesn't know to record a deed? But I realized it was the perception in the classroom that, wow, even this unsophisticated farmer would know to do that, and that's not the world we live in, and that's not who's producing our food source. And I'm very excited to have Russ be part of that team, to be part of that image and understanding of the importance of what that means. So moving on, I'd like to introduce another member coming on to the Palindromes board, and will be chairing our Science and Innovation Committee, and that is Dr. John Schillinger. Dr. Schillinger was I guess we had a facilitated introduction through the University of Missouri and the Missouri Soybean Council, because he had taken on some licensing to some pretty important technology. After several years of running the market intelligence on how we launched this, we had concluded that one thing was critical, and that was that we had to be able to have access and a level of control internally to the agricultural inputs and to what was happening, especially in terms of the consolidations on the side of seed and fertilizers and that sort of thing. And there's not many independent folks left doing independent research in that space outside of a few big companies. And so I was truly honored when that introduction was facilitated. We started working with Dr. Schillinger on purchasing agreements to purchase some of his portfolios and foundation seed units to start growing out multipliers throughout the heart of the Midwest this growing season. I can tell you right now, we think we're going to reach 20,000 acres of multipliers in the seed industry. That's quite significant. What that translates into is millions of acres of commercial seed that will be available for farmers in the upcoming growing seasons. We will have a very aggressive agenda as it relates to that effort. But in that process, Dr. Schillinger and I realized that we also, in fact, had a quite similar vision for the food and feed space. And that advanced into more significant discussions. And at the first of the month, he called me and said he was not ready to retire, that he felt like he had many good years left in him, and that he wanted to maintain a creative role and vision to see his last many years of development, which I will let him talk about more of the significance of his portfolio, and said, I'd maybe like to do this with you. And I about dropped the phone. Actually, it was a Skype call. I almost accidentally hung up the Skype call because I could not believe that he thought so much about what we were building that he wanted to become part of this fold that I absolutely think is a game changer for farmers, not just in the United States and the Americas, but all around the world, with the significance of what he has innovated and developed. And so it is to my much pleasure to introduce Dr. John Schillinger to talk about what that is and a bit about his background.
Thank you. I too reiterate, it's a great pleasure to be here today and to be introduced in the initial stages of palindromes. I want to tell you, I like to relate to people, and I relate to this guy over here because in our first conversation we were comparing their childhoods, little farms, small farms, but big families, and so we realized that we had to think of other things than try to make a living off a little 30-acre farm. So we had a good similar start. But my career took me, and I'm very thankful for my little farm experience because my grandmother and my father taught me a lot of lessons about hard work, the value of hard work, and also the opportunity to do some entrepreneurial thing and growing watermelons and selling it to buy the family's first TV. I did that, so it gave me satisfaction. But anyway, I continued my path in education by going to the University of Maryland, realizing I was the oldest of 7 in a little farm, so I needed to try other avenues of a career. So I got my bachelor's and master's at the University of Maryland, got a PhD at Michigan State, and then I was asked to stay on the faculty at Michigan State for 3 years, and I enjoyed that, teaching and doing research. And then my alma mater asked me to come back to Maryland to start a soybean breeding program, and so I did that. And so in total, I have about 7 years of experience at university level, teaching and doing research. And then I got a call from a large seed company, or actually a pharmaceutical company, the Upjohn Company out of Kalamazoo, Michigan, wanted me to start a new soybean program for them. So my wife and I took a ride to Ames, Iowa, and a tornado went through, and that night we were there, so we got a good awakening to the Midwest. But I took the job, and I tell you, it was a wonderful experience for me, a tremendous. I have by nature, I look at myself as a creator of new things, value-added products, and that company gave me tremendous opportunities to do things that really I build upon as I look at my career. So I was able to do things in biotechnology. I was very much involved in the first Roundup resistant varieties, and then the other things that came through the molecular labs I was able to incorporate into some of my products. And then I got involved with the DuPont company in a joint venture looking at nutrition for food and feed. And that was a tremendous experience of learning and applying my learning to development of new products. And then after 25 years, I retired, and I was too young to actually retire, so I started my own company, Schillinger Seed at first, and then eventually Dow bought a part of it and took my Schillinger Seed logo and brand. So our research goals are, I believe very strongly in them. I was very strong in saying when you breed for higher protein in soybeans or other crops, you have a battle because the yields go down. So you have this negative correlation between more nutritious products and yields. So the last 18 years, my little team has just taken that on as a challenge. And so if you look at our products versus even the large companies' products right now, we have a very significant increase in protein. Our protein would average in a dry weight basis up into 42 to 46%. The commodity varieties on the market today are at least 5% below that. They'd be in the high 30s. And even today, what happened last year in the U.S. was the proteins went down even further. So they're down in the 34% as its basis. So there is a dichotomy there, and the U.S. Soybean Association and the USB have looked at that, and they have a model that's quite scary, that if nothing changes in the big companies, then the protein feed value is going to go down, 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 down. So our competitiveness with Brazil and other soybean producing countries is going to be really more difficult as you go forward. So we're pleased that we have brought forward some very strong products with high protein. And then we've also, in a corollary research project, we have removed what we call anti-nutritional products. Soybeans are a great product for protein, but it also carries along anti-nutritionals. One of them is a very complex sugar called raffinostachyos. And raffinostachyos hinders the digestibility of soybeans by chickens or fish or pigs. It is a very, very antagonistic relationship. So we have taken it out by natural genetics. And I might just stop and say that all we do now is non-GMO. So we're 100% non-GMO. So we did this by some of the learnings I had with the cooperation with DuPont, but also just looking for genetic variation in new places. And so we've done this. And we have a patent on that, which I think gives us a great advantage. Some of the big companies like Tyson and Purdue have tested our product versus the commodity product, and there's very, very significant difference in the ability of the little chicken and the growing chicken to metabolize the protein and produce more meat and require less feed in the diet. So we've done things like that. And then in 2013, I was able to work with the University of Missouri and the USDA and acquired rights to a new oil, the high oleic oil. And so we worked very diligently to bring into the market high oleic. Normally, oleic is like 26% in the normal soybean, commodity soybean. These, what we have now, are up in the 80% range. So we've been able, through the excellent technology at Missouri, to incorporate some very healthy oils, very stable oils in our soybeans. And that's what Karla's group been working with, as they've bought some of our seed stock and are producing. And so we're really excited about that, because that's a great launch of a product that we think very highly of. So we have been able to, because of our aggressiveness, is have products from North Dakota available to North Dakota farmers on down through the southern deep south. So that's a real advantage and breakthrough. And we've also kept the protein up there, so that's an advantage too. So we're looking at many new things that we can add. One of the things is another anti-nutritional in soybeans is trypsin. Trypsin inhibitor requires heating by the processors in order to denature. It's a protein, and it's a complex protein, but they have to heat it in order to denature. Otherwise, you get the same negative effect in the digestibility of animals. Well, we've been able to find, miraculously, some lines that have very low trypsin. So we're now building that into our products. And we have 3 products on the market now that have that. So all these combine and gives us permutations and combinations of factors to enable a whole new marketing strategy. That's what's so exciting, because we've been developing these things, but being a little small company and not having all the muscle in the marketplace, it's been very difficult to take advantage of what we've developed. But I think the timing is perfect. It is really, really good timing. I'm 80 years old, but I really feel like I'm just beginning. And my goal and my vision is to work with Palindromes and put together a research program made up of really talented young people internationally and in concert and develop products that will service not only the U.S. farmers, but also farmers in many countries of the world. My little company has strong market positions in countries like Turkey and Kyrgyzstan and Italy and Argentina. So we're not homegrown completely. We do look at things in a broader perspective, and that fits very well Palindromes' goals for the future too. It's exciting because I think there's so many needs in the world today for protein. If you look at what's going to enable the world population to be sustained, it's protein, and there are not too many sources of protein better than soybeans. And we're even taking soybean protein and enhancing the value by adding amino acids. We have added 4 amino acids to our already high protein. And so we had those growing in our test field last year, and I'm excited. That's a whole new step change in progress, and will help to feed a lot of the people in the world. One of the stories that I think I captured Karla's attention on was I do some missionary work in Kyrgyzstan. In Kyrgyzstan, they came to me and they said, John, we need something. These people are having to import soybeans from Brazil and through many land masses to get there. Can you find something for us? So I sent them varieties, and they found 3 that worked, and one of them is a low trypsin variety, which you don't have to heat. So what they've done very cleverly, the first year I was over there, they had 5 farmers that brave enough to grow these soybeans, and today, honest to gosh, there's 1,300 farmers in Kyrgyzstan, and they get the seed from this little organization, and it's processed and then fit, and 3 chicken farmers buy it, and it's just a beautiful little cycle of making the farmers feel their self-esteem, their self-worth has gone up. That's what I love to do, and I think this company, I'm hoping, will give me a chance to do that more than just in Kyrgyzstan. But that's who I am. So even after 48 years, I feel young, and lots of things I want to do, and that's why I rejected the big chemical company, because I didn't see that enthusiasm. I didn't see them wanting to do what I wanted to do. So I got very frightened by the term they put. These are, John, your products are specialty products. I thought, ooh, that could be good and that could be bad. I thought it was going to be bad. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, John. So as John indicated, these are proven models. The technology and innovation is there. The excitement in the industry is there, from the farmer all the way to the end user. And so having him kind of be that linchpin and key to really come in and help change the way, as he said, specialty maybe not necessarily the right word, because for John and for Palindromes, we see this not as a specialty product, but as the way of the future. And the next shift, the next paradigm shift in agriculture, in basic needs, a different way to approach these base needs, as I said, with a more humanitarian approach, enhancing local communities around the world, better connecting them to the markets, and doing it in a way that is sustainable, that is socially responsible, and that is economically feasible. And so thank you for the time today. Steve, I guess you'll wrap up from here. Yeah, thank you.
I don't shake because I'm old. I have a mild form of Parkinson's, so don't worry too much about me. Sometimes people worry about me. That worries me. I feel a little bit in closing this important meeting today. I remember saying to, on my small Idaho farm where I ran the farm as the oldest child, 40 acres, my dad was a school principal and he ran the school, and that's pretty much how it worked. And one day my mother came out when I was baling straw, and I was about to go to Brigham Young University, and she said, "What are you going to do when you get there?" And I said, "Well, I don't really know. I think I'd like to be like Paul Harvey. And she said, I don't think you'll ever meet Paul Harvey. But she was wrong. I feel today like I met half a dozen Paul Harveys. John Schillinger and I got along. His people think he's one of the leading geneticists. I think he's the leading geneticist. Dr. Anderson, I'm fascinated by what you do. I heard a rumor that the trade tower is made of your formula, the Freedom Tower. And sometime you should tell us that story, because that's a pretty exciting story. Apparently we won't, it wouldn't burn down again, I guess, is what I've heard.
It's also the strongest concrete ever made in New York.
Strongest concrete ever made in New York. And Russ, I identify with you, except that I wanted to be in broadcasting ever since I was 2 years old, but I got there through the farm vehicle. I'm appreciative of us being off to a great start. Now, our formal press conference is over.